A lot of times we put emphasis on the message, but not the way of speaking. So like the content might be right, but you might not be hitting your audience in quite the right way or meeting them where they are. Because everything is so public and it is central. Like if you want to change people's behavior or their influence or what they know about things, you have to have expertise in communication. And a lot of people just think they have it.
Woo, welcome. You have now entered Mad Warfare, mutually assured distraction, where we explore the weird, terrifying, and sometimes hilarious ways war is fought today, and how we can all protect our minds before we go too mad to find them.
Oh my!
Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern.
How can you talk if you haven't got a brain?
Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern.
Reminder, the opinions on this show are ours alone, and honestly, we might regret some of them later. They don't reflect our employers, past, present, or imaginary. This is a playground of wild ideas, so please, don't take anything here too seriously, unless it's genius. Then it was definitely intentional. What if the biggest national security threat isn't hackers or spies, but bad communication? When nobody believes anything, not the government, not the news, not even their own eyes, disinformation doesn't have to win, it just has to wait. Fun! Welcome back to Mad Warfare, everybody. I am Jocelyn Brady.
I'm Sean Guillory, and having fun.
And I believe my eyes today. Our guest has spent her career studying how stories influence what people trust and what happens when that trust collapses. She's the Dean of the School of Journalism and New Media at the University of Mississippi and the founding director of the brand new Center for Information Advantage and Effectiveness. She's also the author of Fake Checking, a journalist's guide to deepfakes. Please welcome Dr. Andrea Hickerson.
Hey.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
And we heard a breaking news that the University of Mississippi just shut down the Narrative Intelligence Center and opened your new one. Should we be worried or impressed?
I think impressed, because change at universities is incredibly slow. So the fact that we were able to pivot pretty quickly as things kind of evolved and we realized all the expertise we had on campus to do something that made sense for us, I think was really great. So the university has realized that they have more expertise in the larger area of national security than maybe we originally considered at the beginning. So we've got the flagship programs for both Chinese and for Arabic on campus, and we've got an Institute on Security Studies. And so all of these are able to come together in this new center, which is more focused on communication, my expertise. I think we'll do a lot with private and public partners looking at what I'll just call information validation. So there's a lot of interesting dashboards out there that people are going to monitor their social environments. But it sounds like there's a need to validate what people see and to see if the products that are out there are really matching different people's needs. So we are working with various companies with tech transfer, data validation, and then also getting some really interesting projects with undergraduate and graduate students to help code what they want to test.
So, and do you mean, like, is that trusting what you see with data validation? Is that part of it?
I think it's partly that, or knowing that you can interpret the data that you see with confidence, right? So I think one of the themes we'll talk about today is how different messages resonate differently with different populations, right? And so do you have the cultural background or the domain-specific background to understand how a message can actually be received? And that's important if you're using information to make quick decisions. You need to understand the context in which that came from. And I think that's something that is really difficult for organizations because they're very hierarchical. You know, where does information vetting fit within an organization? Who does that? Those are all really open questions. But the challenge is to make meaning out of these data dashboards because we're just inundated with data. And, you know, are people getting what they think they're getting when they purchase access to a particular tool?
For folks who are kind of like in this field in terms of like information operation, information advantage, it's an absolute wonderful dream that y'all are, again, like getting funding and really kind of like enabled to do this kind of work. To the folks out there who are trying to scratch their chinny chin and figure out how to pitch similar kind of work to either federal or kind of like state funders, do you have kind of advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that it has been surprising to see how many different types of actors have reached out. So it's both public and private partners. Some are local to Mississippi. So there's a particular group out of Jackson. I'd love to give a shout out to the Spartan group. They've been really terrific. There are a lot of veterans in that particular group, and they're going into this kind of tech transfer space. And so that's one group too, where they want an academic partner to co-apply for SBIR. So that's one really great pathway that we've had. But then also there's a lot of really interesting nonprofits working in kind of justice area with a lot of documentations from international expertise where they need validate information that they get on the ground. And so a university partner can help them too. There's a great program that's partnering with the Arabic program on campus where students are actually interpreting some of the documents that are coming from the ground. And then we can kind of match that with what we see in digital spaces as well. So it looks really different. And I think, one thing that's interesting about starting a center in November 2025 is that we have to really think about the financial model for centers at universities. I could go on this for a while, right? Like we've seen that federal funding can be really fragile, right? And a lot of centers are built is, you get an appropriation or you get a major grant from the National Science Foundation or something like that. And you get millions up front and you've got to exist for the next few years, right? So we are kind of running this center more as a startup, right? So exploring it more as like a membership type of thing. You can help us set the agenda, right? Come be a partner now. Tell us where we need to put our expertise and our emphasis. And so this is really an invitation to join us to figure out what this needs to be. One area that I'm hearing from people that might be interesting is security in the supply chain. So the new Ernst Amendment is asking people to look at not just where products in their supply chain come from, but who is influencing products in a particular supply chain, right? And so this is going to become law. I think this is a great avenue for our center to really work and answer some of the questions, not just about the commodity itself, but who owns the commodity? How does that change over time? What are some of the other networks that might be affiliated with that? But I think that's another place where we can help pull those pieces together and help it make meaning for the person that's doing that. So that's kind of more on the federal end. So it looks really different, which is kind of cool. It's almost like there's so many ways we could go. It's hard to get started, right? And so we're looking for like a passionate person to come in and say, let's do this. And luckily we've got a couple already that we're going to be rolling out here pretty soon to test with students.
What would you suggest for people who are just like communication 101, talking about how not only how do you trust the information, but like how do you handle everything that's coming at us? Or maybe that's not the 101. What's the first thing you recommend to people to learn about communication?
That communication is really hard. It's probably the biggest problem in any organization, right? So I used to do internal polling back when I was in grad school. And it got to the point where I could tell you at every organization, their biggest problem, it was always communication. And I think it's because people make this assumption that they're good at it because, hey, we're talking right now. The three of us, we're really good communicators, right? So people just take it for granted and assume that it's intuitive, right? And so they don't realize all those false assumptions they're making or that they're even a good communicator themselves. And so too often in my mind, communication has been treated like just the vessel by which to do publicity. That's been the focus of it is we've already decided the big thing and I'm going to go hire a communicator to go post it on my website or on my social media or call the press conference. And really communication is central to problem solving because you can predict outcomes, you can have strategies for how things are going to happen. So it has to be, I think it's a C-suite type of thing. We are seeing some organizations put more communications experts there because everything is so public and it is central. Like if you want to change people's behavior or their influence or what they know about things, you have to have expertise in communication. And a lot of people just think they have it.
It sort of reminds me of like I walked wrong as a young person. I had to learn how to, you just like something you take for granted, one foot in front of the other, not really thinking about it. And then I got all these injuries. And when I was analyzed, it turned out that I was overpronating and I was doing damage to my skeletal system. It's just like how it can feel like this intuitive thing you can never get wrong. And then only after you cause some kind of injury or damage do you realize I need to be doing something. I need to be learning how to do this properly.
That's right. And the other thing I'd say about that too is I think a lot of times we put emphasis on the message, but not the way of speaking, right? So like the content might be right, but you might not be hitting your audience in quite the right way or meeting them where they are. And news organizations do that terribly. Like I think the best example of this is how journalism really didn't pivot to online news, right? They shoved the word we use is shovelware. They shoveled the newspaper and they put it as a static page online, right? That's not enticing to audiences, right? And so we're starting to see more playing with that, but I still say they're not quite good at that, right? So communication, the outcome, the product, the style is part of it, and that has to be taken into account when you're working on the message as well, and you have to have a match for that to be effective.
Yeah, I wonder, thinking about the balance between communication and clickbait, the New York Times got flack recently for how they positioned an article about women in the workplace. And I'm thinking it seemed perhaps like the first, I can't remember off the top of my head, is like how women are ruining the workplace.
I read that,
then
yeah.
They changed the title. So how do people navigate that?
Right. And that's a great problem that you've highlighted, because a lot of the journalists are thinking just about the content and not about how it's going to look on the web page. It's typically a set of different people that do that. Some sophisticated news organizations will do A/B testing about headlines, right, to see where they get clicks or where they don't. But that's often out of control of the person producing that particular piece of content. But again, it just goes to show, again, the mismatch between the format and the presentation. The nice thing about a newspaper is it organizes things for us. At the top, at the front of the page, above the fold, those are the premium stories, right? Now, I would argue news is still very centralized and still very structured. But, now you've got more columns, you've got more cues to do things. But it really is, but the clickbait thing is completely fair because they're struggling for an audience, right? And they do need those clicks. And that's something that a lot of journalists are frustrated about, because they don't always have control how that's going to go and where it's going to go, what it's going to look like.
Have you seen any interesting kind of projects on what that future of journalism, be it just like to set up the aesthetics, the UX, like, are there like interesting projects trying to help out? I guess it'd be like journalists themselves, but I guess it'd just be like news organizations as a whole. I don't know if you know, yeah.
I mean, people kind of walked away from that a little bit. There was a lot of energy about that before. I mean, I think some interesting people were like, what if we didn't have a homepage for news? And what if it was just a social media account? So so it's more about the news rather than method. Okay. Those are pretty cool ways. Even text messaging, I think, is actually a really interesting way if we're just talking about delivering news and communicating. That's how a lot of people do it. Now, I think when people are talking about shifting methods, it gets very interesting because it's shifting forms of authorship, right? It's the civic influencers that are on TikTok, and are they real journalists or not, right? Is it Instagram? But, one thing that I think is completely understudied is the relationship when news organizations are partnering with these major social media corporations, right, that they're also covering. There's a conflict in that, right? They're reporting on them, but they are dependent on them completely for their news distribution. And so that really puts them in a bind, but consumers haven't really pushed on that. But that's 100%, something I think that we don't talk about enough.
It's like advertising pharmaceuticals. Like there's one purpose, and then this other, it's like, well, what are you actually trying to get people to take a vaccine for their health or whatever it is for their health, or are you trying to push sales of this thing? It's like these things at odds.
Right. And then it makes it hard, right? Because if you're going to Instagram or TikTok for entertainment, right, it makes it very difficult because you might see some news mixed in there. You don't have the sections of the newspaper that says, this is news, this is opinion, right? Or that this is the sports page. It all shows up together. So that's very challenging for any kind of media consumer to figure out when the genre is shifting in front of them, because it's just a stream of information without meaning. And you might not be primed or in that space to take on the seriousness of the content or not. And then also, we're not even getting the fact that everyone is seeing different streams, right? And so then it makes it, more of an individualized experience than a communal experience.
We might cut this out, but I'm curious about Barry Weiss and CBS and the new direction that a old school news organization appears to be going, and the question of, should a leader of news have a journalistic background? Should they have been trained in it? Versus, do we want someone who's more of a opinion-based writer, somebody who's used to generating clicks, and how do we weigh that and decide? And what does that mean for our future?
Right. That's hard. I mean, there's a lot of people that work in journalism who don't have formalized training in journalism. They just know the domain area really well, or they understand the process of news gathering. And I think that's what it really comes down to, is credibility in news gathering. But you also have to take into account how people get it and what people want, right? You have to have a product that people want. And so I think she speaks to this problem we've been talking about, is that there might be really good news, but we're not hitting the audiences in the same way we did before, because we don't know how to get them as much, right? So whether or not you could be successful in that type of situation, I don't know. It remains to be seen. But what's interesting, I think, about that particular case and talking about 60 Minutes too, and editing, right? I mean, like, everything has always been edited in journalism, right? There is always a selection bias. Maybe bias isn't the right word because people think it's negatively, but like, there's a selection involved, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so a journalist decides what the most important thing is, and they put it in the lead, right? And then they decide what the quotes are. And that is a typical thing. But we're in an environment right now where people are seeing that maliciously. But what an online environment lets you do is link to the originals. So we actually have more opportunities to be transparent about our methods in journalism than we've had before. But news organizations have struggled to do that. I think they haven't done themselves any favors, because they've established themselves as, we set the news, we tell you what's fit to print, right? But they're not telling you how they got there. And I think now we have an audience that, if you're going to convince us that this is newsworthy, we want to know why you decided it was newsworthy. And there are tons of tools and ways to make that happen, but a lot of organizations have been reluctant to do that for one reason or another.
That aspect in terms of like trustworthiness, if there are differences on like what determines, or the variables that determine trustworthiness that folks kind of take today maybe versus years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually the biggest reason people engage with whatever news they do, regardless of platform, regardless of time, are your opinion leaders, right? Who do you look up to? What do they read? Like, if I want to make a break and learn more about a new hobby, right, I'm going to go find influencers in that area and trust them because they are experts already. So it's, that opinion, I mean, this is why social media is so powerful and also so dangerous too, because the whole model is built on opinion leaders, right? You follow the people that you like and you get that in there. But then where it becomes insidious, right, is you get some bad information there from an opinion leader that you've trust on X, but they're sharing misinformation about Y. And it could be on purpose or not. It gets very confusing very quickly. And you're not focused on the piece of information that you might actually think is wrong. You're like, well, Sean did this. Sean's a good guy. Sean would never purposely do this. And maybe he doesn't, but it becomes so messy. But it's the same thing, right? There's people in your town or people in your friend network that you go to for advice, that you trust about, home maintenance or a childcare issue. It's the same thing. It just plays out in all these different areas.
Man, this makes me think of, we're hot off the heels of the BBC getting in a lot of trouble for the way it cut President Trump's January 6th speech. And BBC is supposed to be impartial, so and I think there's a lot of resignation, people resigning. There's a lot of turbulence over there because of that. And so it's like, how do you... If you're going to people, how do you maintain that trust? And how do you stop yourself from getting duped? If we're trusting somebody, we're more amenable to listening to them. It's easier for us to just sort of let the information hit us and think that it's true. How do we protect ourselves?
Starting on the flip side of how do news organizations establish trust in relationships is that we're starting to see them experiment with news products more, whether it's doing podcasts and you get to know the voice or get to understand how they did the reporting, or some very successful news organizations do in-person events, right, where they'll invite a bunch of sources. Like just recently in Texas was the Tribune Fest, and that's a big thing. I've never been, but even like the New Yorker will do events, right? But they do it live, so you can get people involved in things. And even in Mississippi Today has done some events in Jackson where you can meet reporters and get to know things as well. I mean, as a person, as an individual, it's really hard, and I don't mean this I mean this in respect to all people, is that we're really busy, right? And so you have to kind of decide how you want to spend your time and what you want to become an expert in and what you're going to outsource to your mom, right? Or your best friend to tell you, you should really vote for so and so because this is really important, right? Or, but that's hard. And then the other thing I think too is the lack of conversation people have around these topics now. That's really hurting too, is because if something is seen as divisive, people are less willing to talk about it. And that's really harmful because a lot of those are really questions. Even a trusted relationship. Well, maybe I read that news article different than you did, right? What did you get out of it? Why did you think that way? That's an incredibly healthy conversation to have. But in contrast to kind of the partisan yelling or whatever we see online, people in small communities, they don't want to talk about it, right? They don't want to be divisive, right? There are plenty of people who only want good news, right? And examples of that are these TV channels that are just, comedy videos on a loop. Sometimes you'll see them at bars, right? People like that stuff. It's light, it's happy, it's fun. They don't always want to be challenged in everything that they're doing. The problem, to bring it to national security a little bit, is that it's very easy to take advantage of our laziness, right? And so about sports, for example, like let's say sports is my release. And so I just want to love the Ole Miss Rebels. And I hope by the time other people listen to this, Lane Kiffin has decided if he will be in Oxford or not. So fingers crossed, because all anyone talks about. But, there are my whole social media is streams about where's the coach going to go and this or that and his house hunting over here. And people will read all of that stuff. And, it's a diversion, it's a team type of thing. But that's also an incredible vector if you want to start spreading mis or disinformation about things, because you already love the Ole Miss Rebels. So you just kind of slide in there with something. It could be about a company. It could be, maybe it's betting odds that he'll take the job at LSU or not, right? There are a lot of ways that you can kind of manipulate that narrative stream for different things.
I'm really happy to hear that, again, you're talking about, like sports and sports news in terms of national security kind of concerns. If there's like other folks like writing about that, where I have not seen it, but that really excites me that you're kind of seeing things in terms of how sports news and whatnot could be not just a vector, but it can very much stoke certain tensions, ways folks can put information out there to try to like mess with like betting odds that are out there. But that's also a very passionate project of mine as well. So
yeah, it all ties in, because it's like, well, can we walk through a use case, whether it's real or imaginary, of how these things would tie together, like how information is getting infiltrated into the sports conversations,
with sports?
And like how betting plays into that, like how people are gambling their decisions on what they're hearing.
A lot of folks, when they think of betting and they don't bet, they're like, okay, I'm putting down either for this team to win or not, or this team to win by this much or not in terms of like the spread. Because of just internet and latency or whatnot, you can bet on, okay, is this person going to hit this shot right now? Is the coin flip, is it going to be heads or tails? And those are called proposition or prop bets. If you kind of hear like, oh, this person's been limping or whatnot, that can absolutely change the odds on if this is going to happen or not. There's always this kind of fear, and this is unfortunately a big fear still with college players, even though college players do get paid in terms of like stipend, the NIL and things like that now, that the incentives on things on the market could lead them to do something that is like a fix, including like faking an injury or not, or saying, oh, we're really injured, and then they're out there and then it kind of messes odds in the different ways. So there's so many different ways, just with sports and with betting markets, that you can do to manipulate these sort of things.
And Andrea, I'm curious about the sneaking information into sports generally.
Yeah.
Have you already seen that happen?
I have a little bit. So the one that I experienced here at Ole Miss was after Charlie Kirk was killed. There were a lot of these like rumors going around social media on sports accounts, or they look like sports accounts because they're showing up on social media, describing how the university was going to have a visual for him. Like one of the rumors going around was that the children's play zone at the football game was going to be a memorial for Charlie Kirk. Or another one was that the football stadium would be used for a memorial for Charlie Kirk. Like none of that was true, right? But what's really interesting about that is that it's tying a particular ideology or a particular idea about patriotism even to sports, and what is considered, behavior that you should cheer for in the context of, outside of a sporting event, but what's appropriate behavior if you like team X or Y. And I don't think, speaking from the university, I don't think, and I'm not speaking for the university, but I just don't think they thought about that, right? Like that misinformation would be spread through these particular sites. And and we don't know why they were doing it, right? Like, this is an interesting question. Is it just clickbait, like you were saying? Like Charlie Kirk was in the news a lot, and so we're just going to put some information out there and people see it. But beyond the episodic misinformation that people see on sports sites, it's like the same thing that China, we know, has done, right? Is created some lifestyle news sites where it's about tourism, right? It's pandas. Well, gosh, I like pandas. I'm going to start liking that site, right? And then maybe you see something about, that's vaguely political, right? And you gain this kind of sympathy to the Chinese government because they're saving pandas, right? And so you think you're liking a site about pandas, but then suddenly you find yourself getting all these narratives that are, Chinese propaganda. That happens already. So sports is just another venue for people to like the pandas or whatever, and then, become a vehicle to slowly get other information that they might not be exposed to.
It's like communication Trojan horses.
Well, here's the thing. Anything in terms of these kind of like misinformation or disinformation techniques that you see used in politics, you see it in the entertainment space first. Between the Swifties and K-pop fans, and when the first Venom movie was up, Lady Gaga had a movie coming up, and a lot of the Lady Gaga fans pretended to be like angry old women and be like, oh, this Venom movie is horrible. So just the techniques that they use in terms of just other fandoms is something to behold. Some of the fun of that space is the TMZs and the paparazzi and the rumors and the gossip. It's almost like this eternal loophole, which again, like if we're talking about like priorities, yes, help out with election integrity and things like that first, please. But in terms of if we're trying to really mitigate as much as we can, like these real life petri dishes where folks can test these things, I don't know if the entertainment space is just going to be this always open loophole or not. And I don't know if you have any thought because, I just don't know. I really don't.
I don't either, but I do think, so in my research on deepfakes, like everyone wants to talk about deepfakes in the political context, but that's just one area of deepfakes, right? Like to go back to your example of betting and gambling on sports, you could deepfake an injury, right? Like completely make that up. It doesn't have to be real, right? And then it's like, I saw him, he was walking with a limp. He's not going to play on Friday, But people aren't looking at that. And that does have economic consequences for people, right? So I think that is actually higher stakes than we did. Like, doing it in the movies and, yes, you can use all those tactics for good things and entertainment purposes. And maybe in cases like the gossip stuff, we want to believe it, so we're not going to go track it down, right? But if I'm changing my voting behavior or how I spend my money based on it, right, like the consequences are much higher. So maybe that's it, is, there's some kind of synergy about how they're used, because thinking about it and listening to you, like the entertainment space would be a great way to test things out, right, and see what works and what people pay attention to. But then you can go deploy them in these other sectors where they do have consequences.
Hit them in their wallets. I guess that's how we get America to perk up and do something about mis and disinformation generally, is some kind of evidence that we are getting financially hit by this.
The big kind of blowout use cases that you have in terms of even with like deepfakes, was it maybe a year and a half ago where there was that deepfake of the attack on the Pentagon? I think the dip in the stock market was like 7 minutes. If you knew it was coming ahead of time, you still could profit off of shorting that, but that is, if we're looking for a mark of improvement, during the Obama years, there was like a fake kind of tweet about, the White House getting attacked. And I think that dipped the market down 20 minutes or so. So I think it was like State Department folks who told me this. There were a couple things where it was deepfakes of former President Biden saying things that but it was spreading in French-speaking places in Africa where they don't know how President Biden talks all the time.
And that's where that context matters too, right? And there's the delivery of the message and the expertise to interpret that message. I have a couple of graduate students this semester I'm working with that are international, and I asked them what deepfakes they had seen. And one of the women, she's from Belgium, and she was telling me about a woman being pulled under by an orca whale. And I wasn't aware of this, but she said it was all over and in different language presses, but it was this video of that. It was probably old, but it actually did happen. If you remember when Orca pulled a trainer by the hair and pulled her under, this was
Badfish.
Yeah, yes. And so, but that video has been repurposed, edited as a deep fake to look like it happened this summer. And they actually found examples of the same video with a whole different context story, but using a different name for the trainer, right? Like a fake person. And so that was weird because I think people in the US might have some memory of like, oh, I think it was, 2012 or something when that case happened of Tillicum. But, if you're in Belgium and you just, and you're 15, right? Like you don't have that kind of memory to know that that's not actually what happened there. So I think that's what's missing too with deepfakes is when we see something that's fake or real, right? Do we have the cues to interpret the consequences of what that image is? Or in news, it could be anything, right? And sometimes the other thing I'd say to that, Sean, too, is it's not always the quality that's convincing, right? It could be bad.
Sometimes
so,
the bad quality is convincing.
Exactly, yeah. So like the Nancy Pelosi tape from a while ago where it manipulated her audio, like the video was real, but it slowed her down. And so there were these rumors going around that she was drunk. And then I actually spoke to a reporter that was at the event, and he said it was so surreal because he just, covering the event like a press conference, and then he hears the audio, the video, and was like, that's what happened, but she didn't sound like that, right? So that was not super sophisticated. Yeah, I mean, like, it's pretty easy to do that type of thing. But it's, again, what kind of background knowledge do I have to say she wouldn't do that or he wouldn't do that? And that's why particular case studies that are dangerous are international case studies. And I would also say that I think the sector that will grow the most and I'm most concerned about in the US is the private sector with CEOs, right? Like we don't know what a lot of officials look like for financial companies or local banks or those types of things. So they would also be very easy to manipulate in this environment. Another area that didn't occur to me until recently where this is relevant is pharmaceuticals, right? Think about all the risk in a pharmaceutical supply chain, right? Like that is 100% an issue that needs to be monitored about, the materials, the messaging, all types of things there. So we've got a great pharmacy school on campus that has been federally funded for a while. So hopefully we can start partnering with them too.
Wow, just having LSD in our Tylenol supply. See what happens.
I read something this morning kind of about healthcare. Well, a lot of advice that you'll hear on these commercials is go talk to your doctor, right? So that's the trusted person to do that. But if you don't want to talk to your doctor, and you're going to go ask somebody else that maybe uses the same medication.
ChatGPT.
But I read yes. And so that's what I was going to say. I don't know if you saw it. I read it this morning about ChatGPT, people using it for medical advice. And people believed it because of the tone and it sounded authoritative. That was it, right? It was just the delivery mechanism. And that's why people believed it. And so that's why we have to really think about the message and how it's delivered and how it's received. Like you can't separate those out into different parts. And that takes some kind of finesse and it's hard work, but it's interesting work.
Yeah, I think it's also difficult in this country. We've had our medical care isn't the world's best. And we've had a past where, when I was growing up, everybody was scared of if you had a pre-existing condition, you wouldn't be eligible for health insurance. And so there's a resistance to talk about anything or even be honest with your doctor. And I think there's still a twinge of that because of the uncertainty and what's going to happen with healthcare and insurance. So it's like, how do we manage can you trust your doctor versus going to ChatGPT, let alone the data protection with ChatGPT. Where does that stand?
So I'd have to be fact checked on this, but I'm under the impression that when they do these kind of annual which professions are trusted or not, while nurses are usually top 3, it's usually teachers that are like top 1 or top 2. Usually nurses are like a top 3. Doctors are usually like bottom 3 in terms of trusted. Yeah. So just that kind of dichotomy right there. And like how much they need help to be
a little time with patients too. It's like it probably feels, how can I trust somebody who seems like they're rushing me?
Right. But then there is that default too. Like, I wonder how many people say that, but actually if push came to shove, they would go do that.
Fair.
So
it's self-report.
For example, the number of people that say, oh, I hate legacy media. I hate the Washington Post. And at the next conference, is like, oh, the Washington Post said this about me, right? Like that is classic. So it's used when it's convenient for you.
The danger of surveys.
Yeah, the self-report. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And polling. Yeah. Do you think that we're talking about fiddling with archives and deepfakes, could that also happen with medical, like studies on pharmaceuticals, for example? Have we seen that happening? Oh, no.
I don't know that we're seeing it happening or that we're looking yet. I mean, I really think that it kind of go back where we were at the beginning is these are perceived as communication problems, right? But they are problems in every field, right? And so I think that now the tide is shifting a little bit to thinking like, oh, we missed it, right? We missed it. Other people are more effective in this space. And there's a sense of kind of playing catch up. I don't know that, I mean, it seems like it's related, of course, to cybersecurity, and that should be part of these conversations as well, locking down data sets, right? But I don't know. I hear people talking about it, but I don't know how much that's implemented, or if these are people on the side being like, you really need to do this. That's kind of what I think, because I don't think people thought about it that same way. And this gets at this really interesting dichotomy of making public data sets, right? But then also making them secure for people. And this is kind of the bind for deepfake detection too. So I've worked with my colleagues. We're academics. We built a deepfake detection tool. And so we did some interviews with journalists at, really reputable news organizations and said, would you use a tool like this? And one person said, well, no, I'm only going to use it if it's open source. And we said, well, that's not going to work for us because that's showing you the blueprints to how we found out your video was fake. We can't publish that, right? Because then we're telling people how we robbed the bank repeatedly. So that is the bind in some of these professions that, of course, value transparency and public awareness. But how do you secure things for the public? Then it comes back to these issues of trust, right? That we've had to put some parameters on it, and here's why we chose to do that. And so that is a tough problem for people.
Here's something else in terms of, again, like who can help out with these issues, which if you're more focused on national security, and then if you're even more focused on the like DOW or IC, if anything, they have like enough groups, be it like, okay, information operations versus, your PsyOps. There's a lot of folks throwing their hand up that want to be helpful in that, which is actually a great thing.
Yep.
Did you also work with private folks? I'm actually curious about this because my experience is when it comes to kind of like who's going to be in charge of like looking at the things for a company, you go to the cyber folks, they're like, that's not me. Maybe you talk to like the PR marketing, they're like, oh, that's not me either. And you kind of go around until the hot potato just like falls on the ground. I really haven't, I haven't checked hard on this maybe in the past 2 years, but I don't think it's been that different. But in terms of industry folks, do you see like departments that are like reliable, kind of like the departments that throw their hand up and like, okay, we're going to be the ones that like lead this effort? Because in my experience, I've been trying to, it was more on the government end, that kind of integration of where cyber meets like information operations and, like kind of working together.
I went to Soft Week 2 years ago and I was startled by how many tech companies were kind of in the information space. And so I went around and I talked to a lot of them, but a lot of those products were built for commercial uses and then they're trying to get them applied to other spaces, right? So they had a hard time themselves articulating the value that they had there. But same thing. So the question I tend to ask these companies, particularly analytics groups that use media as data, right? So, and as when we've talked about this already, there is a structure to journalism, right? There is the lead, there is the summary, there are quotes, there are the experts. I am very concerned that when we say AI generated summaries, that they are not weighted appropriately for the logic that a journalist has put in a story, right? So, I mean, the stories are weighted. That would be a way to put it. Most information, inverted pyramid, right? And I have asked this question every company I deal with, right? And they're like, I don't know, you'll have to go talk to the data scientist guy, or, you have to go talk to this person. But that is literally the output that they are selling to people, right? It's like, I have summarized this corpus of data for you, and here are the main takeaways, right? But maybe they're not, right? Like, are they not weighting the main takeaways? What if they're pulling facts from the bottom in there? And so that's where I think the center can play a role in validating these types of things,
Absolutely.
right? Like, and maybe you have a business that it doesn't matter, right? You're just reading or kind of seeing what's in the news. You might not need that type of thing, but maybe you do, or maybe you need it in a subset of things. And I think that's where the center can sit and kind of help organizations, companies, nonprofits even too, because they certainly have these needs as well. And I think we can help with that. I want to work with nonprofits is to help them understand information too.
Do you have a dream clients? Do you want to name?
Right now, it all feels so new. Everybody sounds exciting to me, right? Like everybody does. So I don't know, all of it. It's really the ground floor, and we're looking for those partnerships. So now, please reach out. It's the time to really get in and help us kind of focus our initial work. We'll have an event in Oxford at the beginning of next year. I'll be sending out a Google Doc about that. If you want to get the Google Doc from me, but like, what would be helpful for you? That is the question that we'll kind of be asking. The theme I'm kind of thinking about now is thinking beyond dashboards. That's because I feel like I get approached by a lot of companies with like, hey, you want to check out our dashboard? And then people are like, check out my dashboard. And news organizations, I've created a dashboard, but like, what does that mean, right? Like, what is it there? So that's like the working theme.
Let's ideate on that. Like,
okay, good. That'd be very helpful.
Yeah, I actually want to. I'll be thinking on the spot with you on that.
I'm just thinking how ridiculous it sounds to have a dashboard, like a dashboard off. Yeah, but I don't know what the
like a pie baking sort of thing.
I got a bigger dashboard.
Oh, like the dashboard. Okay, it's trying to get all that information like on one screen in theory.
Right. Because a lot of companies are giving you, here's what happened in the past year, the past week, a heat map. And so it takes a work from a researcher's perspective to do some kind of case studies, right? And say, okay, this is when you should really be concerned. Because I might see a spike in sales of chicken soup, but I don't know what that means. Does that mean there's a shortage of it? And I think that is the challenge, is that people have these products and they're cool products, but even they don't quite understand how they can be used. And so I think my concern is that dashboards create a false sense of knowing, right? Like you can know everything, but when do you intervene? Right? What is the signal that pushes it over to the edge to do that? And in my experience, some of the current dashboards that are cool, and it's a hard problem, and I get that it's a big ask to go back and get that historical data, but you have to say this is a time where something really shifted or meaningful happened in the past. Yeah. And it can be hard to go back and extract that particular data set.
But if you can get the person who's looking at the dashboard, the folks who are in charge that would make these decisions, to be able to be like, if this happens, this is what I do. So kind of like modeling the decision makers themselves. So maybe some of the aspect is having these kind of, sometimes you call it like intelligent agents, sometimes you call them
a dash guide.
Well, that's a fancier name than these like IBM geeks usually come out with in terms of these.
I think we need like salience detectors. This is something.
One
of my favorite things.
That's a good way of putting it. I like that.
That's a better term. Well, again, I actually have seen that in like the betting space and the kind of the investing space, but again, they're little kind of models and indicators. But yeah, I guess something similar to that. I could see that as being at least a step after dashboard. So the dashboard is now just the game board, and now you gotta make your little character and how they interact. I don't know.
But you just helped me, Sean. A study that I'm just starting now, which again, inviting help for this too, is, so I'm teaching a class in the spring on digital investigations. And of course, my background is journalism. But what I want to do is a survey of different professions doing digital investigations to see if they approach their methodology and their data the same way. So like I'm thinking about law enforcement, intelligence, but I hadn't thought about finance, right? But you're right, they're investigating where they want to invest over time. And so I'm looking to see what do we do, right? Like, how do we get there? And maybe some of that, the idea about salience will come up in there, or maybe it's different. I really have no idea.
So
insurance companies too.
Insurance, that's a good one too.
You get like actuaries and in terms of like actuary science on that. And then I'm retouching now a lot of these kind of finance folks, but my knowledge, I feel like, is still probably like 10-ish years old. But there was a time where if you were like, I want to start a hedge fund and here are my indicators, and some were machine learning based and some weren't, but if you had like, here are the indicators that are going to be used to determine if I buy or sell something, like that's how important at least indicators were at the time. I don't know how much like 10 years later, but that kind of modeling and making indicators, at least kind of like how we're talking about like pulling in that dashboard information, I think the finance folks could help you out with that.
That's great. Thanks.
Can send in your ideas, folks.
Yeah.
madwarfare@gmail.com. I have one more question that I wanted to touch on, which is, I was so delighted when you talked about how much you hate the term media literacy. You mentioned to us previous to this as sort of like, actually, if I would like you to explain what is the challenge or problem with this, and what can we do about it?
Right. I mean, I think the first thing that I'm skeptical of is like every vexing problem to people, political polarization, they don't understand things, is, well, we just need media literacy. And then the conversation ends, right? Like, what does that mean? And basically when people talk about it, it means that the audience has to do a lot more work, right? Which kind of defeats the point of journalism or getting information from an expert to begin with. And we just can't do that. So the way I think of media literacy, it's like we know we need to be conscious consumers of news, but it's like the same way I know what a healthy diet is, but I'm still going to eat a Little Debbie every day after school because it makes me feel good, right? So it's that. It's putting the emphasis back, and sometimes we don't do healthy things, right? So it's both of those, is that we don't always do the right thing. And it's a lot of work, right? Because how do you, I can look at a story and think, okay, well, these are the sources that they cited in here. Here's the date line. Here's where the photograph was. They really should have included a source from a different NGO when they reported on this. Like, that's a lot of work. And at that point, I'm re-reporting the story, right? So I don't think that that is what media literacy is, right? I think we can teach, and we should teach people to be critical consumers of news, right? But it's not always news. It's the platform. It's how did you get it? Why are you listening to Jocelyn? It's all of those types of questions that we should be asking, and not just focused on, what people say. And my other main critique of media literacy too is people focus, I think, too much on the organization that shared a piece of news rather than the piece of news itself, right? So I get frustrated. I'll do these assignments in my classes, and I love to do this. And I'll say, who do you think is a good news source? And people will say, well, I love Fox News because the New York Times is so biased. And then I'll get papers that'll be like, I love the New York Times because Fox News is so biased. And I love to put these back in front of the students and be like, well, why do you think that? And why do we attribute it to the whole organization rather than the information in the story itself, right? Because the reporter is on the ground, they're an eyewitness, they're in Venezuela, they're doing this type of thing and gathering it themselves. That's very different from the fact that it just was published in the New York Times or on Fox News. So I think it just becomes a proxy, media literacy, to truncate really important conversations. And so I just find it not quite helpful as a way to advance conversations. It just kind of makes people feel better.
I want to run by you this, I'll even send it to you later. One day I was like, Sean, I want to make up an acronym for something again. And I was frustrated with media literacy also. So I just made up this thing called FIB test. How is this thing making you feel?
Yeah.
What is the identity? It's, if you believe this, what does it say about your identity? I'm a person who believes in free healthcare, whatever it is.
Yep.
And then benefit, who benefits from you believing or acting on this?
Yes, I like that. And the Society of Professional Journalists and their Code of Ethics, which is pretty good, although I just read they're reevaluating it. But, in contrast to other professions that say do no harm, they say minimize harm. And so I always like thinking about that too, is when you read something, who is harmed? Because someone is always harmed almost when it's in the media, right? And so I think that that's helpful. And so I like what you're suggesting. And I think, one alternative I've pitched to people too is focusing on media ethics instead of media literacy, right? And turning it into okay, this is a good article. I should think about, should I share this article? What am I, I should be a responsible sharer, and I'm sharing this because I think it's good, but it becomes a politics of responsibility rather than this kind of general boogeyman of media literacy.
That is interesting.
Wow. Well, it's a good thing healthcare isn't positioned that way, huh?
That's right.
Andrea, is there anything else you want to shout out or promote?
No, this was really terrific, and I'm glad to have the conversations, and I hope this is just a beginning of conversation with both you and others. So like I said, I'm very excited about the center, and I'm looking for partners to help us figure out where it needs to go, and the opportunity is great, and we're just ready to get started.
How can people reach you? How would you like to be contacted?
Yes, you can email me. It's probably the easiest way. My email's pretty easy. It's Andrea with an H at the end, ANDREAH for Hickerson at olemiss.edu.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
I've come to talk with you again. Come and be inside my head. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you cancel me. It's only a matter of time till we all win. Cancel the say. It's only a matter of time till we all win. Cancel the say. It's only a matter of time till we all win. cancel me.